in huge detail, but Keepak are an Irish and UK business, manufacture across 14 manufacturing sites, and add a variety of different products, either in raw meat or in some chilled convenience goods. The site I'm at, Summit Foods, produces sandwiches, and along with our sister site in Kirkham, producing Rustler's burgers, which may well feature in your vending machines. Quick little bit about me. Why am I talking to you today? Why do I even claim to know what I'm talking about? Well, I've been in the food industry for 15 plus years, always working within technical, which is around food safety, quality, and legality. I've worked for Tesco, and I've also worked for a variety of manufacturers. And currently, my entire role is around ensuring food safety and legality of the chilled foods we produce that could well be in vending machines near to you. So what do you need to know about fresh food? How do we go on the journey from getting fresh chilled food from where it's been manufactured into a vending machine? And what I'm going to do in today's session, and there may well be quite a bit of overlap with things that Wendy will share with you in the next session, but I'm going to kind of walk through where we are from before ordering stock, through leaving the warehouse, during transit, and then once it's in your store. So starting off, before you've even ordered stock, you'll need to register to sell food with food.gov.uk, and that's important from the FSA and the local authorities to have that registration, so that they know who is accountable, who is owning that food, who is the food business operator, as it's called. But you're not alone in that journey, and the AVA has produced some really good handy guidance and practical guidance for how to have that in a hygienic fashion, and how to get your vending machines ready for chilled food. And then this is the kind of the key points that we'll focus on a bit, but you need to have a suitable transportation network with reliable food chillers at all phases through the process, and some key trusted partners to take care of some of the supply chain complexity. We'll come on to exactly what that means. So briefly, the law, the main piece of legislation in England and Wales is the Food Safety Act 1990, which is then enacted via the Food Safety and Hygiene Regulations England 2013. And at one point I did know every single clause of it off by heart, but I've forgotten a lot of it. But the main responsibilities covered by this act are to ensure that businesses do not include anything in food or treat food in any way that would be harmful to the health of people. And that's the main framework legislation, the Parliamentary Act that then is enacted through regulations that environmental health officers and the Food Standards Agency look at. And some kind of the key takeaways from it is that food business operators must have a food safety management system based on HACCP principles, and I'll come on to HACCP in a minute. And there's some kind of key takeouts that it's an offence to put unsafe food on the market available for sale, and food premises must be clean. And the law as written says that they must be clean. It doesn't say which bits have to be clean, what cleaning standard. So a lot of that is based around kind of what's reasonable for a business of your type and size. And that's feeds onto the due diligence defence, and I don't think I've ever done any kind of training course, seminar, webinar that hasn't touched on due diligence around food safety, because one of the key defences against a breach of this law is that the person in charge, the food business operator, has taken all reasonable precautions and then exercised all due diligence to avoid the commission of the offence. So if you think about in the factories I run, where we're producing 250,000 sandwiches a week, there's risk of pieces of metal from the production line getting in there. So a reasonable precaution is putting a metal detector at the end of the line. If I was operating a burger van and I was only selling 100 burgers a day, it wouldn't be reasonable for me to put that precaution in place. So the word reasonable precautions is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that. And due diligence is about ensuring that whatever you've said you're going to do, you follow through, you keep records of it, people are trained, and so on. And so how do you work out what are those reasonable precautions? Well, the law again tells you what to do. You have to have a food safety management system based on HACCP principles. So HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. and it's the way that we control our processes to make sure the food is safe. There's a very specific way of doing it. It was created in the 1960s. It's the closest thing you'll get to a joke in this presentation, but it was developed by NASA. The idea being that getting food poisoning in zero gravity was probably a bad idea. So they worked on ways to prevent food poisoning from happening, which has led to the kind of the birth of HACCP, which has rolled out kind of globally. And you can see from the table there, you define all your process steps, so the purchase of the product, the transport through to the vending company, receipt and storage, transport to the machine, how you fill and clean that machine when you're going, and what potential hazards might occur. So if you're not going to clean the machine properly, then you'll see microbial growth. That will potentially affect the product. It'll affect the user and make them ill. You might have, if you've bought a sandwich from a non-reputable company, you don't know what they're doing. There could be all kinds of foreign bodies, bones in bits of chicken that are still present in a chicken sandwich. So you kind of assess every process step, identify all the hazards, and then you put control measures against each hazard. So you might say, well, I'm only going to buy from suppliers who are registered with BRC, who's a national kind of audit accreditation body. You might say, I'm only going to use nationally recognized logistics providers. You would then identify whether any of those control points are critical to ensuring food safety. And then you make sure that you have monitoring and records in place and corrective actions. So it's how you meet some of the standards developed by the AVA, and this also can be done depending on the size and scale of your business through something called Safe Food Better Business, because this is very, very technical and needs somebody who kind of understands HACCP and how to make it work. But there are simplified versions that use these principles, which allow you to comply with the law, but make it a bit more simple to follow. And the whole process, as I've said already, it's how you identify the hazards that you need to control and how you identify what's a reasonable precaution for you to put in place to monitor it. So if you've got a vending machine, would it be reasonable that you clean it 3 times a day, every day? Almost certainly not. But would it be reasonable that when your technicians go to top up stock, that they wipe things down and there's a process for what they clean? Well, probably that would be. So you look at this as kind of a logical risk assessment process. And you want to be using technology and foods that limit the risks. It's always better to do that. So if you've got, would you really want to be putting sushi with 1 day shelf life in there that needs to be replaced every single day? Would it be better to have maybe you look at some of the kind of the wall sausage rolls that they might have 8 or 9 days, so you can think around that and make sure you've got the right temperature controls and the right systems. So again, have you got the best technology that you could be using? And again, it all falls into, if you've got aging stock, is it reasonable for you to replace all of the stock, or should that be on a program? And that's kind of a judgment call. So we've agreed what to do before ordering the stock, and now we've ordered stock and it's in the warehouse. What does it need to do when it's leaving there? So temperature. When you're moving into the fresh food environment, the vast majority of that will be needing to be chilled, and checking the temperatures is critical. So legally, chilled food must always be no higher than 8 degrees Celsius. Best practice is to keep it below 5 throughout its lifespan if you can. That will help prevent growth of any nasty bugs and germs. And you need to avoid relying solely on vehicle cooling systems. So just because that transport vehicle's running at cooling temperature, was it there in the warehouse? Is it there on the loading bay? Could things spike up? Particularly thinking about risks of during the summer if things are left on a loading bay for a period of time. And then throughout the whole process, the product packaging needs to be in good condition and not damaged. Again, preventing cross-contamination, preventing risk, which is all about what we need to ensure. During transit, very similar story. We need to keep checking the temperatures. We need to ensure that food has always stayed at the lowest temperatures we can get it to, below 5, never above 8. Using accurate temperature probes, so just because the air around the product is at 3 degrees. Is that product there? So there are kind of infrared probes you can use. There are some destructive ones you may want to use. You have one sandwich that you use to keep testing throughout the pallet. There's different ways of doing it, but you need a method, because keeping those accurate records, again, going back to that due diligence defense, shows that you've been duly diligent in exercising your precautions. You've said that we need to keep it cold. We will keep it cold. Here's my evidence that I have kept it cold, including the dates and times. So that is demonstrating throughout the whole process that you've got control. So we're now delivering into store. And again, it's kind of repetitious, but when transferring it, we always need to ensure food stays at 5 degrees or below. Kind of a rule of thumb, if you're filling up a vending machine, if something's out of the chiller for more than 15, maybe 20 minutes at a push, it will need to go back in because it's going to be unacceptably warm. So you want to try and put those things in first, get that filled up as quickly as possible, so then you can focus on the ambient products that you might be topping up. And in order to do that, you're going to want to have that dedicated storage spaces around with the vending unit. So wherever you're placing them, have they got chiller space? How near is those chillers to the vending units? If there isn't there, it's going to have to be as soon as it's unloaded, it's topped up. Is there an interim place? If we're using interim within that store, again, it'll need that regular recorded temperature checks to make sure that product stays safe. And I know later on today, one of the other presenters will talk about training, but one of the things you'll need to ensure is that staff have completed food handling training. So you want them to have done at least a level 1 hygiene course, ideally a level 2 for kind of supervisors in there. And again, the AVA offer some simple food safety training courses to kind of gain that knowledge. And this is a point I've not really touched on, but because I mentioned earlier on that food being unsafe in the market is illegal, a lot of what's traditionally in vending machines, you can think in crisps or chocolate or drinks, they will come with a best before date. If you're selling something chilled and it's fresh, it will more typically have a use by date. And that difference is critical because a use by is saying that is the point at which that food is no longer safe to consume. And if food is on display for sale past its use by date, that is an offence. That is putting unsafe food into the marketplace. So when technicians are topping up, it's really important that they're checking the use by dates and rotating through stock, because otherwise you can end up in a situation where something's on display that's not legally allowed to be on display, and that can compromise you. So within your HACCP plan, within your risk assessment model, you will identify that this product might only have 4 days shelf life, or this product has 8 days shelf life. And that when your technician comes around twice a week, they check the dates and they keep records that they're doing that, because that will help defend against something being missed. But it's critical that you don't put things out there past the use by date. Best before, maybe customers complain, maybe they don't like it, but it's not going to make anyone ill or even worse. So it's a crucial thing to think about. Not going to talk too much about allergens because I know Wendy will come on to that in a bit more detail, but there are 14 main allergens recognised between the UK and the EU. There they all are. I think most people know of, everyone knows nuts, peanuts, people know about shellfish. And there's a few in there that a few people can't always think of. People know of lactose intolerance, but there's actually a difference between that and milk allergy. Again, when you're buying prepackaged food, it's already labelled. So you don't need to put any additional labelling in place, particularly for glass-fronted vendors. And when it's closed-fronted vending, information must be available to the consumer before the product's purchased. So even though it's going to be on the pack, they don't know what they're buying. And once they've bought it, they need to have been able to find out what those allergens are. In both cases, it's probably good practice to keep a record of all the products you're stocking and what all the allergens are. And then that way, you've got a reference template that someone can refer back to if they're looking at a closed-fronted vending, or even if they've got a query on an open-fronted, glass-fronted vending machine. Simple solution the AVA comes up with here is keep a scrapbook of labels. But again, if there's other ways of contacting the vending operator, phone, website, QR code, that's always great as well, particularly if it links to a page with a list of everything that's in there. There's much more guidance on the Food Standards Agency website, which I've got the link there for you. And again, I know Wendy's going to talk in a bit more detail about that after me. So, fair bit of information. What are the kind of key takeouts? Always ensure that chilled fresh food is kept below 8 degrees as an absolute legal minimum requirement, but below 5 is best practice. Make sure you're checking the temperatures of food and storage areas regularly to ensure that you keep that food there and keep accurate records. Those people completing the records and handling the food should be trained, and that's showing they're competent people. And we've sort of touched on that a little bit with the electrical safety, but it applies to food safety as well. And ensure that allergens are correctly labeled and visible. And again, keeping records throughout. That's thinking due diligence. I've thought about my risks. I'm managing my risks. I'm recording my risks. But when you work with your trusted partners, you can take the complexity out of this, asking people for help and support. A lot of your logistics providers probably already do a lot of the temperature monitoring things, so they can advise you. A lot of your suppliers of chilled food that you might want to put into a vending unit, like KeepApp, we do supply sandwiches and Rustler's burgers, have got people that can give you advice and support. So if you're not sure, don't take a risk. Ask people for help and support. So, any questions, anybody?
Yeah, there are no questions posted at the moment.
Well, okay. As usual, I have a few.
I knew you would, David. I knew you would.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned about food registration. We have Jamie from the FSA who's going to go through that in a bit more detail later in the day. And you also mentioned the good practice in food hygiene guide. We've been working with the FSA for nearly 18 months now to get that updated. It's about 12 years out of date. Again, it reflects in the main the current legislation. There are one or two areas where it's been updated. So for now, that's a good reference. But watch out as we launch the new version of that once it's been approved by the FSA. And that deals quite specifically with good practice for vending and dispense. So covers the areas that you've talked about. And one of the things you mentioned was about sort of the HACCP really going through those steps and making sure that people are monitoring and recording the temperatures of the food. I mean, does that just essentially mean a lot of paperwork? Obviously, if you're only selling a dozen sandwiches through a machine or whatever, as you say, what's reasonable that you have to take a record, or must it all be electronically recorded somewhere?
Again, it's going to be up to you, I think, as a business and an organization. Electronic monitoring would be great, because if that stores to a system and you can download that data, and it takes the kind of the people element out of someone forgetting to do a check, but that may not be a practical or affordable solution. So sometimes it is a simple a sheet of paper that someone checks, start of the day, end of the day. How reasonable is that located? If you're talking kind of your classic vending machines, if it's running at the start of the week, fine, and it's operating, it's well maintained, there's no reason to suggest it would go out of sync. I think the longer you end up with, the longer a gap between checks, the less due diligence you've got. So again, I think if you've converted the whole unit to being fully chilled and that's all it provides, and the chilling isn't for drinks to make them palatable, it's for a food safety step, you're going to be doing a lot more checks than if it's just one section that's running.
And we're seeing that more and more with the use of smart and the growth of smart fridges as well, where yes, it is a full fresh food offer, as opposed to just a few sandwiches in a zoned machine. And again, you talked about shipping and transporting the goods from the warehouse to the machine, to the site, to the store. Yeah, if it's only a handful of sandwiches or something like that, is it sufficient to use a cool box, or should it be more regulated than that?
Yeah, again, it'd be interesting to get the FSA colleagues' view on this as well, because people would take different views. But
Yeah.
I think for me, everything comes back to what have you said in your asset plan? What is your risk? What is your
Yeah.
judgment call? So how long is it going to be in that cool box? How confident are you that that cool box is going to maintain temperature? Have you tested it? And people use fancy words like validation, but if you if you had a temperature probe and took temperatures throughout the journey and proved that for the 20 minutes it's come from cash and carry to this store that it's going to hold, then you may well be able to make a case that that is sufficient. I think in a lot of cases, you're going to, if you're talking larger distribution chains and dropping up multiple points, then you're going to need probably a chilled vehicle that's got a motor running on it. But again, it maybe sound like I'm giving the politicians a evasive answer, but I think it comes down to what are your risks? What do you think, where are the opportunities it could go wrong? How likely is it to go wrong? And then work out how do I stop that happening?
Yeah, and I suppose if you're measuring the temperature as you go along, you say it's about running a trial, from leaving the warehouse to arriving at the machine and having gone in, then if you're recording the temperature and it's not holding, you're going to need a refrigerated vehicle or a refrigerated section within your vehicle to hold that temperature, because it's got to be kept at 8 degrees.
Yeah, that's right. And you've got that responsibility, and it's a lot of the things around this, and that there are some complicated, more nuanced things within the legislation, but a lot of it comes down to the common sense element. You need to be washing your hands, the premises needs to be clean, the temperatures need to be kept. You keep things in a fridge, you don't keep them out on the side, and if you do for too long, they're going to spoil. And you have to think that you're providing these to anybody, and that's part of, I didn't touch on that in Hassett, but you have to realize that anyone could come to your vending machine and buy that product. And that could be somebody, it could be a pregnant lady, it could be someone who's immunocompromised, maybe they've got some illness. So you might be fine with it, but they might not be. And you have to kind of think of that worst case when you're dealing with chilled, perishable goods, because making sure people are safe has got to be the key element.